So far, we've discussed most of the setup functions and the basic usage of the AR and Collections Manager. Now we're going to go into some of the special areas, and in this video we're going to discuss writing off small remaining amounts. There are lots of reasons why customers leave remaining amounts. They might be issues that they were charged for something that they didn't order. They were charged for a service that they're not supposed to be charged for, like for example freight, or maybe they were charged sales tax when they're exempt. There are lots of different reasons. In many cases, I've seen situations where customers just leave small amounts unpaid. They don't pay the invoice to the penny, and they leave $1.27 or $6.93, and it's just not worth the time and effort to collect this. On the other hand, there may be situations where they've partially paid and you don't want to write it off. So we're going to take a look at how you use the write-off functionality, and we're going to do it from scratch. I'm working in this case with a brand new instance of Business Central 16. We've done nothing except we've set up users. Haven't done the installation, haven't run the generate and update exceptions routine, haven't done anything. So we're going to start from scratch. The first thing that we need to do is we need to go into debt collection setup. Now, as you can see, there's nothing that's done here. So the first thing we need to do is make it editable. And we're going to initialize ARC setup. And you can see that it populates everything in here with basic functionality, but there are a couple things you still have to do that involve write-offs. The template has been selected for write-offs. That is which journal we're going to make the entry into, because what we do is we identify an amount that needs to be written off, and we create an entry in a journal. Usually another person besides the person recommending the write-off actually reviews, approves, and posts the journal. So in this case, by default, we've decided that we're going to create the entry in the cash receipts journal, and that's fine. Let's go into edit. But you can change that to be any journal you want. If you want to use the general journal, that's fine. So we're going to use the cash receipts. Now what we want to do is create a special batch just for write-offs. Now, although it says that it's there, it actually isn't. You need to go in and you need to hit new. You can see that the batches that are in place are Bank, General, and Giro, which is a European account. So we're going to hit new, and we're going to type in write-off. Don't need to capitalize it. It's a code. It automatically write-off. It automatically gets capitalized and put in the description write-off. So we are going to use this batch for write-offs because we don't want to mix these entries in with anything else. So we click OK. Now the reason code is write-offs, and the reason that we use this is because we want to be able to track how many times that we've written off amounts, so that when we record a write-off in the customer ledger entry journal, that it's flagged with a reason code write-off. Now, you can use any GL account you want. We've arbitrarily set it 11,200. That probably is not the right account. You'll need to correct that. I've seen some companies use use whatever account you want. So these four have to do with write-offs. That's really all we need to worry about right now, because everything else has been set by default. Everything that you need for write-offs. So that's done. That's the basic setup. We'll in another video we'll review the details of all of the different settings and what they do. So the next thing we need to do is generate, and we need to create the generate and update exceptions. So we click OK, and that's done. The next thing we want to do is run the the payment class calculation, which isn't actually necessary, but we might as well do all of the basic setup. This was, unfortunately, this was done with the wrong work date, I believe. Let's just check and see what the work date was. No, yeah, this is, most of the entries are in January of 2022, so we need to make this something farther out so that we have things that are overdue. So let's make this, and now we're going to rerun, we're going to run the generate and update because we probably didn't get very much. So we run that again real quick. And now let's run the calculate payment class function. There, that's better. Now we're going to update the payment classes. Done. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is we need to short pay an invoice. So I'm going to go over to the cash receipts journal. And from here, we're going to say document type is a payment and the account type is customer. And the account that we're going to record a payment on is Selengorian, which is 2,000, 20,000, 20,000. And now we're going to apply entries. Now, the one we're going to work with is this one. And what we're going to do is say that, in fact, what they pay, the amount to apply is $270. We're going to, for the purposes of this, we're going to say the $9.57 was shipping, and Selengorian is going to say that they don't pay shipping. So they're going to pay everything except that amount. So we're going to post this payment. Now, one of the things that I could have done, and I probably should have done, is I go into preferences and my settings, personalize, sorry, and we're going to add a field. And the field we're going to add is the reason code. There we go. So we're going to find the reason code. Because it's not on the, I don't believe it's on here by default. Project code, department code. Reason code right there. Okay, so now we're going to put the reason code over. We'll put it right there. And now we're done. Now, had I thought of this beforehand, what I could have done, let's see, where did that go? The amount, department code. Where's the reason code? Well, let's try it again. Personalize. And let's add this field. We're going to want to put it right next to the amount. Well, I thought I'd put that on there. So let's just leave the screen and go back in and see if it's there. And let's see if it is. There it is. It's way over here. Okay, so let's move it to the right place just so we can do this correctly. The reason code should be, we'll put it right there. Perfect. Now, when you make the payment, the first person who's going to notice that the payment has not been posted in its entirety is the person posting this cash receipt. Now, if they know why that this was paid short, they can go in and they can add in some reason codes, like for example, freight, and they will have to add these in. This customer did not pay freight. And let's add another one in. Sales tax. Not tax liable. Okay, so you can add in as many different reasons why somebody might pay something short. In fact, maybe it's unknown. Maybe the person posting the cash receipt doesn't know why it was paid short. Let's spell this correctly. Okay, so they can then mark this with a reason code at the time they post the cash receipt. Now let's see what happens when that occurs. Now remember that the exception list is not going to show this payment until we run the generate and update exceptions routine. So let's just verify that. So we see that the original amount is this and the remaining amount because it has not yet been updated. So we're going to go through and we're going to generate and update exceptions. And now when we go in to the exception list, we're going to see a couple things. First, we're going to see the remaining amount is now $957, and this has been flagged. If we you can see this a little better when we edit list. So these two are marked as having been paid short. Now, so we go in and let's say that today we're going to deal with invoices that have been paid short. So we resort this in descending order, and the two are at the top. Now we've decided in this case that we're not going to pay one other. Yeah, no, this is right. Okay, so one other thing, we've decided we're not going to collect this. Selengorian was right. They're not supposed to pay the freight. We might want to set the reason code here that it's freight. Now, something that we've done on this is we can make the offsetting account. So we've set this up so that the offsetting account, let's go back and look at this. Go back to debt collection setup. So now we've said that by default, if nothing else is acted on, we're going to write this off to 11,200, GL account 11,200. However, what we can do is we can say on the reason code, so now, let's do this from the exception list. So we go into the exception list, and let's, in descending, so that this is up at the top. There. Now, had we done this from the cash receipts, let's just make this editable. If we had done this on the cash receipts journal, this would already, and resort this again in descending order so it's at the top. This would have been specified on the cash receipts posting, and it would automatically show up in here. Now, one of the things that we allow you to do, I just showed you the function in setup is that it was going to be 11,200. However, that's not the account that we want to use when we write off freight. When we write off freight, we want to apply it against the freight account. So we're going to say edit list, and now we can say for freight, we're going to pick the account that we want to use for writing off freight. So let's say that there isn't, well, we'll use discounts granted. You might have a freight account here for revenue that when you post freight that it's added to this, but we're going to say discounts granted. So now when we write this off, it's automatically going to use discounts granted, this GL account, instead of the default in GL in debt collection setup. Now, what we do next is we put a check mark in write-off. Now this one we're not going to write off. There's no way we're going to write off $75,700. The customer paid $2,500 on a fairly large invoice. However, it is really interesting to know that it was paid short, and this is one of the reasons that you might want to contact the customer to find out why they only paid $2,500. But this one we've decided to write off, so we put a check mark in write off. Now the next thing we want to do is we say if there are any others that we want to write off, we check mark all of the ones that we want to write off. And then we go into, click on this little ellipsis and say write off. Now it's going to say the lines we've checked will be entered into the cash receipt journal and batch write-off, which is what we set up in debt collection setup. Do you wish to proceed? Yes, we do. So now the entry has been created. Now, as far as the usage is concerned, usually the person that's dealing with this and making the recommendation is done. The fact that an entry has been made in the cash receipts journal for posting is usually a supervisor's job to make the final decision. So let's go over to here and go to the cash receipts journal. And we're going to change this batch because we put it into the write-off batch. So we look in here, and here's the entry that we just made. When we clicked write off, this entry was created. And if you remember in debt collection setup, we had set up 11220 as the write-off account, the offsetting account, but we set it up that when we use a reason code of freight, we want to write it off against this account. Now you can set these things up to suit yourself. You can set up as many different reason codes as you want. You can set them up with whatever offsetting account you want. Even if the person that's posting this doesn't like this account, then they can change it. They can change it to be whatever they want. So either the person that's reviewing this agrees and says, yep, that's correct, and we're going to post this, in which case, if we do post this and then run the generate and update exceptions routine, then the remaining balance will be 0. Well, let's do it. So we're going to post this, and it's done. Now we go into the exception list, and you'll see that the entry is still there, because remember, this is the exception list is not a live system. You see it's still there. However, when we go in and run generate and update exceptions, now when we go into the exception list, the remaining balance has dropped to 0. Not only has it dropped to 0, but it's dropped off this list because the remaining amount is 0. So, since there is no more remaining amount, the customer paid the $270. We wrote off the freight, the $979 for freight. Now, when we run generate and update exceptions, that invoice has been satisfied completely, and it's removed from the exception list. Now, had we not decided to post it, maybe the supervisor who went in to look at the entry said, no, we're not going to write that amount off. We're going to collect it. What they would do is simply delete the entry from the cash receipts journal. Now, what's going to happen is there is a function over here called JE created, journal entry created. When we click on this function write-off, when we click on the write-off function right here, it creates the entry in the journal and it puts a check mark in the field JE created. This is a safety mechanism to prevent you from accidentally pushing that over to be written off twice. So you'll get an error message if you try to put a check mark in write-off. You'll get an error message that says you can't do that because it's JE created must be no. Now, if you then go to your supervisor and you have a conversation and explain what your rationale was as to why you thought that it should be written off, and the supervisor then says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Sure, send it over again and I'll post it. Then go to the JE created and uncheck this field. Then you'll be able to go back in and you'll be able to write this off again. Now, we set some limits. If you remember from the very first, let's take a look and see what the limits are on the collections rep. So we go to collections representatives, and I'm logged in here, and my limit, allow write-off, has been checked. If this isn't checked, then you won't even see the entries, the columns in the exception list dealing with write-off. All of those columns will be hidden if the person that's logging in does not have a check mark here. We're going to talk about this one in a second. Now, I've got a limit here of $50. So I'm allowed to write off up to $50. Now, if you remember, there's another. There was that $78,000 one. So let's go back to the exception list. And since my limit is, and here it is, 78, there's 75, 752. If I try to write that off, I have to go into edit list. And if I try to put a check mark in write-off, I will get an error message that says I'm not allowed to, says Bob Cole does not have permission to write off an amount more than $50. So we can we can leave the screen and go back in, but that just prevents you from accidentally writing off more than your limit. Now, there are situations where, particularly when you first start using the software, that check mark, let's go back and talk just for a second about the exception list. The other thing that the system is designed to prevent you from doing is writing off anything that has not been paid short. The whole concept of writing off is for short pay invoices. If you're going to write off an invoice in its entirety, then you should rightfully use a credit memo, which is also available in the collections system. You can create a credit memo. It will be all set up for posting. The application ID will be set. The amount will be set. Everything will be set for you, and all you need to do is post it. Now, maybe as a collections person, you're not allowed to do credit memos. That's somebody else's function, in which case you then go over to the collection setup and not check credit memos. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But as I said, at this point, the only thing that you're allowed to write off are things that have a check mark in short pay. If you try to write off something that has not been marked as paid short, you'll get an error message. Let's go in and edit list. Business Central has a better idea. So if we go into and try to write this off, number one, it's above my limit. But number two, short pay must equal yes. That means this has to have a check mark. Yes is checked, no is not checked. So it's saying that we can't write this off because it's not a short pay entry. So in a situation where you first start using the software, and you may have entries that in fact were paid short, but the software wasn't here to be able to create this check mark in this column, that you look over here and you say the original amount was $822, and let's say the remaining amount is $22. But there's no check mark here because the software wasn't in the system at the time the payment was posted. So what we did, if you run into that situation, is we allow you to go in, and this is only for situations during your initial cleanup. So we go into collections representatives. Now, I mentioned before about allow credit memo. So if you want to have your collections representatives be able to post credit memos, then make sure that you check this, because if it's not checked, they won't even see the icon, the shortcut to create a credit memo. But there's another function here, and let's edit this list, and it's allow implementation write-off. This is intended to allow you to take care of those kinds of situations where the invoice was paid short prior to the installation of the AR and collections manager. So if we put a check mark in here, then, and now we go into the exception list, now we will be able to write off something that is not flagged as short paid. However, I still have the limit, the $50 limit. So even if I try to put a check mark here, I'll get the error that says I can't write off that much, but I won't get the error anymore that says I can't write this off because it was not paid short. So we go to edit list. And now we go into put a check mark in this one. And we still get an error message, but it has to do with the limit, not the fact that it wasn't paid short. So this is intended only to be used during the very initial stages. When you first run the generate and update exceptions routine, you're first going through the exception list and you see things that have been paid short but they aren't flagged. Once you've cleared all of that stuff up, I strongly recommend that you go back into the collections rep screen and uncheck allow implementation write-off so that the software is back to its design function, which is only to allow write-offs to be posted against invoices that have been paid short. This concludes the instructional video on using the write-off functionality. Thank you.